18, the $8 Amish well water filter that lasts 30 years. Why the bottled water industry is terrified of this. The porch boards are still warm under your feet. The tea glass on the rail is sweating into the wood, leaving a ring your wife will mention tomorrow. Somewhere past the screen door, the first thin whine finds your ear. You already know how this evening usually ends. You go inside. But tonight there is a dented tin can sitting on a flat stone at the edge of the grass. A curl of pale smoke rises straight up from it, slow and steady, the color of an old man's hair. Inside that can are three things. Two of them are probably growing within 30 feet of where you're sitting. The bees keep working the clover. The dog hasn't moved off the step. And in about 12 minutes, on a still evening, in a yard the size of most yards, the whining stops. Stay with me. If you're the sort who'd rather build a thing than buy a thing, who remembers when a porch in July didn't require a $40 gadget and a subscription refill, then pull up a chair, stick around with this channel. And before we get to what's in that can, do me one small favor down in the comments later. Tell me what your grandmother used to burn out there on summer nights. I want to see how many of us remember the same smell. The can on the stone is nothing special to look at. It's an old coffee tin with the paper label long since burned off, the metal gone soft brown from heat and weather. My grandfather kept one just like it on a slate at the corner of his garden, and he'd tap the spent ash out of it against his boot heel every night before he came inside. I was maybe 8 when I first paid attention to it. I asked him what it was for. He said, "Keeps the bite off." That was the whole answer. It took me 30 years to understand the rest of what he meant. By then he was gone, and I was standing on my own porch, swatting at the back of my neck with a magazine, looking at a yard I'd just paid a man $90 to spray, wondering why the mosquitoes hadn't read the receipt. The bees were gone too, which I hadn't expected. The robin that usually worked the lawn at dusk wasn't either. The mosquitoes somehow were. That was the night I started remembering the can. You've had that night. Maybe it wasn't a sprayer. Maybe it was a citronella candle on the patio table that did exactly nothing once the breeze shifted off the field. Maybe it was a propane fogger you bought at the farm store, the one that hissed for an hour and left your tomatoes coated in something you couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was the little blue device with the refillable cartridge that worked the first season and then quit the second, the way those things do. Whatever it was, you stood there afterward feeling slightly foolish, slightly poorer, and no less bitten. That feeling is not an accident. There is a whole shelf at the hardware store designed to give you that feeling on a 4-month cycle. Each item on it promises a little more than the last one. Each item on it costs a little more than the last one. And each item on it, when you read the fine print honestly, works in a tight little envelope of conditions that almost never match your actual backyard. Still air. No humidity, no wind, a 6-foot radius, a specific temperature, the conditions of a laboratory, not a Tuesday in July. The plain people figured this out a long time ago, mostly because they never had the option of buying their way past a problem. When the mosquitoes came in off the low ground at dusk, they had 2 choices. Go inside and lose the evening, or solve it with what was already in the garden and the woodshed. They chose the second answer, so often it stopped being a choice and started being a habit. The habit was a smoldering can. The can was passed down without ceremony, the way most useful things are. Now, here's where I want to be honest with you because I'm not going to sell you anything in this telling. The can on the stone is not a miracle. It will not clear 10 acres. It will not beat a stiff wind off a lake. If a thunderstorm is coming in and the air is moving in 3 directions at once, you're going inside, same as anybody. What it will do on a regular summer evening in a regular backyard is move the line of the war about 40 feet further out than it was before. That's enough. That's almost always enough. And it costs about what a cup of coffee costs, the kind from the gas station, not the kind with foam on it. The tinned can is free because you already drank the coffee. The base fuel is pennies. The plant material is either growing in your herb bed or growing in the ditch behind the mailbox, depending on which version of the recipe your part of the country settled on. There is no cartridge to buy. There is no refill to remember. The whole apparatus, start to finish, fits inside one hand and lasts the rest of your life if you don't step on it. So before we open the can and look at what's inside, and we will, in just a few minutes, I want to walk you through the math of what you've probably already spent trying to solve this same problem the other way. Because once you see the number out loud, The can on the stone starts looking less like a quaint old trick and more like the thing that should have been on your porch the entire time. Get your tea. This part is going to sting a little. Sit down with a pencil for a minute. A box of citronella candles at the hardware store runs you somewhere around $12, and if you're honest about it, you go through 3 or 4 boxes between Memorial Day and the first cool night in September. That's roughly $50 before you've done anything else. Add the propane fogger you bought 4 summers ago, call it 60 when it was new, and the 2 cans of fuel concentrate it drinks every season at about 20 apiece. Add the little blue clip-on with the butane refills. Add the pump sprayer of yard concentrate you mix up twice a year. You're standing somewhere north of $140 a summer. I know men who spend $200 without blinking. Multiply that by the 15, 20, 30 years you've owned the house. The number gets ugly fast. Somewhere in there is a used truck. Somewhere in there is a freezer full of beef. Somewhere in there is a year of property tax. And all of it went up in a thin chemical haze that drifted off into the neighbor's yard before the mosquitoes finished laughing at it. Here's the part nobody at the cash register explains. Citronella, the actual oil, works in a narrow envelope of still air around the flame. It masks the carbon dioxide you breathe out, which is how a mosquito finds you in the first place. The moment the breeze shifts, and the breeze always shifts, somewhere between the second beer and the first lightning bug, the mask comes off your scent and you're a target again. The candle is still burning. The candle is still working in the strict laboratory sense. You are still being bitten. Both things are true. The fogger is a different kind of failure. It works. That's the trouble. It works on everything with 6 legs that happens to be in the air column when you walk past with the wand. The mosquito dies. The honeybee that was finishing her last run on the clover dies. The lacewing that was about to eat the aphids on your bean plants dies. The little brown moth that comes to the porch light, the one your granddaughter likes to watch, dies. You paid $60 in a refill to flatten the whole small economy of your yard in order to win one fight against the one bug you actually wanted. Gone. And that is where the pot on the stone starts to separate itself from everything on that shelf. The smoke from the can is not a poison. It does not drift through the grass, killing what it touches. It does something quieter and stranger. It confuses, for a little while, the very narrow sense a mosquito uses to find a warm body in the dark. The bees who navigate by sun and scent in daylight are mostly already home by the time you light it. The dog, whose nose is built for 10,000 things, registers it as wood smoke and goes back to sleep. The moth at the light is unbothered. You are unbitten. Nothing has died for your evening. Now I'll tell you who profits when you forget all of that. It isn't a person. I'm not going to give you a name to be mad at, because the name isn't the problem. The problem is a kind of business, the kind that needs you to come back to the same shelf every April, the kind that builds a device around a refill cartridge, the kind that turns a folk practice your great-grandmother did with one hand while she was snapping beans into a bowl with the other and sells it back to you at a $40 markup with a battery in it. That's the villain. It doesn't have a face. It has a quarterly report. This is the place I asked you about earlier, and I'll ask again because I mean it. Think back as far as you can. Your grandmother's porch, or your aunt's, or the back step at whatever farmhouse you spent a summer at when you were small. Something was burning out there at dusk. Maybe it was in a coffee can. Maybe it was in a clay pot with a chip out of the rim. Maybe it was just a smudge of something thrown on the edge of a brush fire. Whatever it was, the smell of it is still in you somewhere. Drop a word about it down in the comments when you get a chance. I'd like to see how much of this we all already know without knowing we know it. Because that's the trick the aisle is counting on. Not that we don't know, that we forgot. The whole $40 industry sits on top of one quiet bet that you will not remember the can on the stone and your kids will not remember it. And by the time their kids are sitting on a porch at dusk, the only answer in the house will be the one with a barcode on it. Remembering then is not nostalgia. Remembering is the whole rebellion. So let's open the can. Let's look at what's actually in it, one thing at a time, in the order it goes in. Start with the vessel, because it matters more than people think. An old steel coffee tin is the classic, and it's classic for a reason. The metal takes heat without warping. The sides are tall enough to keep the smolder out of the wind, and the bottom is flat enough to sit steady on a stone. A small cast iron pot works too. A terracotta saucer set inside a larger terracotta saucer works beautifully, and it's what my grandfather actually used in the last years, once the coffee can finally rusted through. What does not work is anything painted on the inside, anything galvanized, or any plastic-lined tin from the modern shelf. Those put something in the smoke you don't want in your lungs. Take a nail and punch 6 or 8 holes around the lower third of the can. Listen for the sound of it, that small bright tick of metal giving way against the wood under it. Those holes are not decoration. They let air feed the bed from below, so the burn stays low, and even instead of choking itself out the first time the leaves settle. Set the can on a flat stone or a brick or a paver, never on the wood of a deck, never on dry grass, never on the porch rail. A stray ember off the rim is a small thing until it isn't, and we are not in the business of trading a mosquito problem for a fire department problem. Now the base fuel. A thin bed of plain hardwood charcoal, the lump kind, not the briquette soaked in starter fluid. Half a handful is enough. If you've split firewood this year and you have a few pieces of dry, punky oak or hickory that crumble in your hand, that works even better and costs nothing at all. What you are after is a base that will glow steady at low heat for 30 or 40 minutes without ever showing real flame. If you can't find lump charcoal, a few small chunks of hardwood broken to thumb size will do the job. Avoid pine for the base. Pine flares. Here come the 3 things inside the can. The first is what I call the carrier, the leaf that makes the smoke itself. Dried garden sage is the one I reach for first, the kind that's gone gray-green and brittle on the stem after hanging in the shed a week. Rosemary works. Common yard mint, dried, works in a pinch. The carrier's job is to produce a slow, cool, pale smoke that drifts low across the grass instead of climbing fast and dissipating. A handful loose, not packed. Pack it tight and you smother the bed before it gets going. The second is what does the actual work. Catnip, of all things, is the strongest one I've found, and many gardeners have long noticed the same. The leaves of catnip release a compound. Researchers have identified it as nephatalactone that mosquitoes actively steer away from when it's warmed but not burned hot. Lemon balm does a similar job through a different compound, citronellol, which is the same family of oils the candle on the table is trying and failing to deliver. Bruise the leaves between your palms before you drop them in. You'll smell the oils come up. That smell is the medicine. If you can't smell it, the mosquito can't either. The third is the binder, and this is the part most people skip and then wonder why their pot burned out in 4 minutes. A small knot of dried garden twine, or a pinch of dry pine needles, or even a folded scrap of brown paper bag. Something that holds the leaf material together against the heat so the oils release slowly instead of flashing off all at once. You only need a little. Think of it the way you'd think of kindling under a log. It's there to bridge the gap between the coal underneath and the green dried leaves on top. Lighting it is its own small craft. Get the base coal glowing first, the way you'd start a charcoal grill, until you see the orange creep through the lumps and the heat hits the back of your hand at 6 inches. Then drop the binder in, then the carrier, then the working leaves on top, in that order, and press them down gently with the back of a wooden spoon until the orange disappears and what comes off the top is pale gray and rises straight up in a slow column. If you see flame, you've lost the medicine to the fire. Smother it down a little more. If you see no smoke at all, lift the leaves and let the bed breathe. It is a small fire that wants to be paid attention to for about 90 seconds, and then it will run itself. Set the can upwind of where you mean to sit, about 10 or 12 feet out, low to the ground. Mosquitoes fly low. Most of their hunting happens in the first 3 feet of air above the grass. So a pot at knee height does more work than a candle on a table at chest height. For a normal back patio, 1 pot is enough. For a yard the size of a small pasture, you'll want 2 set at the corners of the seating area so the smoke drifts across the space instead of past it. Keep 6 feet of bare ground or stone between the pot and anything that can catch. Then sit down, pick the tea glass back up, wait. By the time the ice in that glass has melted down to a thin layer at the bottom, about 12 minutes, on a still evening, in a yard the size of most yards, something will have changed that you won't quite be able to name at first. The whining at your ear is gone. The thin black shapes that were drifting up out of the grass have drifted somewhere else. The bees are still working what's left of the clover in the last light. The dog has rolled onto his side. Your wife comes out with a plate of something and doesn't go back in. That is the whole trick. That is what the $40 shelf has been trying to sell you for 30 years. and what was sitting in your herb bed the entire time. Stay with me. There is one more thing to say about what the smoke is really doing and why it matters more than the mosquitoes. Look back at the yard for a minute before we close this out. The bees on the clover are not in distress. They're finishing the last runs of the day the way they always do, and they'll be back in the hive before full dark. The dog hasn't lifted his head. The moth that lives somewhere in the lilac has come to the porch light, same as every other night. Nothing has died for your evening. That sentence is worth saying twice, because it's the whole difference between the can on the stone and the wand on the fogger. One moves a problem. The other flattens an ecosystem to win an argument with a single bug. Here's what the smoke is doing in plain words, as best as anyone who's looked into it can tell. A mosquito doesn't see you the way you'd guess. She finds you by the carbon dioxide on your breath, by the small heat signature of your skin, and by a handful of chemical traces in your sweat. The smoke from this pot, warm, oil-bearing, low to the ground, confuses all three of those senses at once for as long as the column holds. She doesn't die. She just can't find you. She drifts off towards something she can read more clearly, which is usually the wood line or the neighbor's unlit yard. That's not a kill. That's a redirect, and a redirect is enough. Many beekeepers will tell you the same plants in this pot, sage, rosemary, lemon balm, are used in different form to calm a hive when they're working it. I don't want to overstate that. Heavy smoke of any kind disturbs any insect in close quarters, and a pot of smoldering leaves 3 feet from a hive entrance is a different thing from a pot 50 feet from one. But at the distance we're talking about, in the open air of a backyard at dusk, the bees go on about their business, which is more than I can say for what the yard sprayer does to them. Now, the honest part, because I owe you the honest part, this won't beat a stiff wind off open water. It won't swamp. It won't help you if you live in a place where the mosquitoes come up out of standing water by the millions in July. You've got bigger drainage work to do first, and no pot is going to fix that. What it will do is hold a normal backyard on a normal summer evening, for as long as the pot is smoldering. Refill it once, and you've got the whole evening. That's the promise. I'm not going to dress it up any bigger than it is. If you're the kind of person who'd rather build a thing than buy a thing, who looks at the patio pest shelf the same way you look at the bottled water aisle with a kind of tired knowing, then you already understand why we do this. There are more of these coming on this channel. The plain ways, the cheap ways, the ways your grandfather would have nodded at without making a speech about it. Stay around. You'll know your people when you see them. So here's what I want you to do between now and the weekend, and I'm going to say it in the order it happens, not as a list. Walk out to the herb bed tomorrow morning while the dew is still on it. Cut a good handful of sage, a good handful of lemon balm, or catnip, whichever you've got more of. Tie the stems with twine and hang them upside down in the shed or the garage where the air moves through. By Friday evening, they'll be dry enough. Saturday at dusk, find your coffee can, punch your holes, set it on a stone at the edge of the grass, and do exactly what we walk through. Then sit down on the step and don't get up for the first 12 minutes. Just watch. The next time we sit down together, I want to tell you about a glass jar of well water that the plain people set on a south-facing windowsill for 3 days before they drink it. There's something happening in that jar, slow, quiet, almost too simple to believe, that the bottled water aisle would rather you never thought about. We'll open that one up next. Bring your own jar. For tonight, though, the pot on the stone is still going. The smoke is still rising straight up in that slow pale column, the color of an old man's hair. The clover is closing up for the night. The porch light has come on without anybody touching the switch, the way it does this time of year. The tea glass is empty, and the screen door, for once, stays shut.